Hello everybody, Calamity here, and today's video is going to be all about Diona. We're going to go over her talents, constellations, weapon recommendations, artifacts, team comps, and last but not least, a little bit of a support showcase at the very end. Before we begin, let's talk about what Diona's role is in the team. She is a support in every sense of the word. She provides healing, she provides shields, she buffs your team, as well as debuffs your enemies slightly. She's basically a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Unfortunately, she does get overshadowed by, more popular healers out there like Bennett, but she does serve her role pretty well. And she is still used in a lot of popular teams, even in the Spiral Abyss. So in my opinion, she's still worth very much building. That being said, let's get started on how to build her. The first talent is the normal attack called the Catslane style. I'm sure I mispronounced that. But this is her normal attack talent. It has no special mechanics to it. It is very standard. In fact, we won't be touching it. For all intents and purposes of this guide, we are just building Diona as a simple support character. This means we don't have to focus on upgrading the normal attack talent. Eventually, if you decide to, for whatever reason, make your Diona a DPS character and you're going for memes and stuff like that, then you probably will upgrade this later on. Moving on to this skill. The skill has two variations of it. There's a press version and there's a hold version. We're going to be using the hold version because that is the version that gives us a shield, and we definitely want a shield. It also fires additional icy paws, which are basically these projectiles that deal cryo damage. And also something worth noting is that when the shield is created, you'll know you'll have a shield because there will be a cute, adorable cat shaped shield around your character, but also it will affect your characters with cryo. This is also really good for cleansing. If you enter certain domains, you might get afflicted with a negative elemental debuff, whether this is from the electric domain, the fire domain, things like that. The shield that Diona provides can essentially cleanse it off of you. Except the cryo one. I forget which one that is. I think that's the talent one in Mondstadt. If we check out the skill attributes, you can see that the icy pod damage is very low. The skill multipliers are really low. Even though that it does shoot out 5 paws when you do the hold version, it's still not that great for damage. But it is good for breaking shields, and that's something I should mention. Diona is also really good at breaking non-cryo shields. So if you're going up against hydro or even electro shields, we'll showcase this later on, but we can also see that Diona's shield is based off her max HP. It takes about 13.7% of her max HP plus a base of 1646. Now this is at level 11, so yours might actually be a bit lower. Unfortunately, this shield isn't the strongest, especially when you compare it to characters like Zhongli or Layla, but I feel like it does a good enough job, at least against most enemies. Well, if you're just using Diona for exploration purposes, this shield is more than enough. However, if you do end up going into Spiral Abyss or even some boss fights, this shield, it definitely won't be the sturdiest. It'll probably save you from a hit or two, but it's gonna break pretty easily. Last but not least is her burst, which is called Signature Mix. This is how she heals. She's gonna toss out a cold brew that deals AoE cryo damage and applies the Drunken Mist in the AoE. I thought this effect was going to be really cool and it was going to like slow down enemies or maybe slow down their attack speed and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it does no such thing. It will only continue to do cryo damage to opponents that are within the AoE, which is actually kind of nice. It means she'll be able to consistently apply cryo to help you with your melt setups or freeze setups, depending on what team you are running her in. And of course, if you're standing in it, you will also be continued to get healed in intervals. So we can see here that the damage, again, pretty low, pretty negligible. And then the healing is once again also based off Diona's max HP, which is why getting HP on your substats as well as your main stats on artifacts is how we're going to scale Diona's healing and shields. It does have quite a high energy cost, so energy recharge is also going to be another valuable stat for Diona. Next up, we have her Ascension passives. Let's start with the first one, which is called the Cat's Tail Secret Menu. This one's going to provide a movement speed increase and a stamina consumption decrease by 10% when you're shielded by the icy paws. This is like a very okay, mediocre kind of buff. It's nice to have, sure, just to have that movement speed. And if you are pairing her with a character that does do, like, say, charge attacks, then she has a way of like helping you maintain your stamina. It's okay, but it's nothing crazy to write home about. Next up, we have Drunkard's Farce, which is going to be the next Ascension passive, and this is going to decrease your opponent's attack by 10% when they're standing inside of the AoE of your burst for 15 seconds. A nice, again, just like the previous one, a nice little, in this case, a minor debuff to your enemies. It's going to give you a bit more value on harder hitting enemies, of course, and bosses. You will probably not notice the difference on weaker enemies like slimes and hilichurls. And last but not least, our bartender is also a cook, because when you are cooking any restorative dishes, you have a chance, 12% chance that is, to double the product. Let's talk about weapons. First of all, Diona is very easy to pick a weapon out for. She doesn't have that many that are good for her. But if you are just starting out, a good 3-star bow that you can give her is a recurve bow. But you want to quickly eventually get your Diona either a sacrificial bow or a Favonius war bow. Let's talk about the two different the differences between the two weapons here. So a sacrificial bow is going to give you a chance to reduce your elemental skill cooldown, basically giving you a second one for free. I really recommend this weapon if you're going to give Diona a cryo teammate that could really use the cryo particles. So whether it's a melt team, whether it's a freeze team, like for example, if you're pairing your Diona with Ayaka, for example, and Ayaka really wants her burst up as often as possible, a sacrificial bow is going to help her do that quite often, since you're getting so many cryo elemental particles from the skill. Granted, it goes off twice. You can add additional refinements here to increase the chances of your skill resetting, so that this is more consistent. However, that is definitely not necessary. Mine is at refinement 1, and I feel like I get the reset fairly often. Enough. But also, if you do decide to go sacrificial bow, don't be lazy like me. Actually get your sacrificial bow to 90 just so you can get some more extra free energy recharge. I recommend a Favonius bow if Diona is going to be the only cryo unit on your team. So this is if you're using her in, say, like fridge team, hyper fridge team, or a melt team. Then a Favonius warbow is probably going to be the better option, because the elemental particles that this weapon generates are omni particles, which means they're effective on any element, whereas the sacrificial bow, you're only generating cryo particles, and that's only going to be efficient for cryo units. For this weapon in particular, though, you need to actually do a crit, which will then generate those extra particles every 12 seconds. If you get additional refinement ranks on this weapon, it's going to be a consistent 100% chance every time you crit within the weapon's cooldown, weapon effect cooldown, that is, to generate those extra particles. Now, for Diona, you don't need to go too ham on crit rate to get this effect going, because since she is cryo, there are multiple ways to get free passive crit rate. So if you do pair her up with another cryo unit, you activate Cryo Resonance, which gives you, I believe, a 15% increase in crit rate there. And if you are using her in a melt team, for example, and you have Rosaria on the team, Rosaria also gives you free crit rate. Which is why the Favonius bow is so good on Diona, just because you can build up that free crit rate. Not to mention, again, we're doing the hold version of the elemental skill, which shoots 5 projectiles. As long as one of those projectiles that hits crits, you get the effect of this weapon to go off. So even at a low-ish crit rate of like 25%, you shooting 5 particles, or 5 projectiles, chances are at least one of them will crit, hopefully. But, you know, every now and then you'll get unlucky. If for whatever reason you're looking for a 5-star option, there's only one that I can really recommend, and that's going to be an Elegy for the End. This gives a ton of energy recharge to your Diona, first of all, but I also only recommend this weapon if you're going to use Diona in a fridge team or a melt team. If you're using her on freeze team, this weapon isn't going to be that great on her. The reason I recommend this weapon is because when you use your elemental skill or burst and it hits an opponent, Diona's weapon here will give your entire team 100 elemental mastery plus 20 attack. This is going to be huge, again, for elemental reaction teams like Melt or Hyper Bloom or just regular Bloom. Alright, for artifact sets, you actually have a ton of choices on what you want to go for, but the most common option is a Noblesse Oblige set. This is an artifact set that gives Diona yet another buff to her team, giving them a 20% attack buff when you use her elemental burst. Do keep in mind that this effect does not stack, so if you have another character in the team that already has a Noblage artifact set up, then this isn't going to do anything for you. Now, if you're wondering, alright, I already have Noblesse Oblige, what are my other options for artifacts? You have quite a few. If you really do want to enhance your Diona's healing, if you feel like it's just not enough for you, a Maiden's Beloved full 4-piece set could be what you want. You could also just go for the 2-piece here and then mix and match several different 2 artifact piece sets with Diona. Another good 2-piece effect that you could get here is a Tenacity of the Millelith. This is going to give Diona a straight up 20% HP, which is good for both shields and healing. You're going to hear me say this a lot. That's what we want with Diona, as much HP as possible. So unfortunately, in case you were wondering, a 4-piece set effect of the Tenacity of the Millelith is not a good option for Diona because it only applies the buff from this set when you use her skill. If it was her burst, then this set would actually be quite viable for Diona, giving her team a nice attack boost as well as strengthening her shield. But unfortunately, her skill does not apply damage even when she's off the field. Another good 2-piece effect that you could go for is the Emblem of Severed Fate. This gives Diona an energy recharge boost of 20%, and then you can mix this with the Tenacity 2-piece set, giving her both a nice balance of energy recharge and HP. And finally, if you do have access to this new domain, which you probably should if you were doing the last event in this update, the new set called the Vurukasha's Glow, this also gives you another 20% HP bonus on the 2-piece effect. So what you could do is get a 40% increase in HP effect by having a 2-piece Tenacity of the Millelith set. This is good if you really want to boost both the healing and the shields that Diona provides. As long as your energy recharge needs are met, this is actually a solid option to go for. When you finally decided on an artifact set that you want to build your Diona around, let's talk about the substats that you're looking for. So first and foremost, you're definitely going to want HP percentage. This is important, as I've mentioned before. Better healing, better shields. Next up, you're going to want energy recharge because you want your Diona to get her burst up as often as possible. That's how she heals. So if you don't have your burst, or your burst is not consistently up all the time, you're going to find your healing rather lacking. A good amount to go for is 180 to 200%. That might seem like a lot, but because we're only looking for HP percentage for the most part for Diona, it's actually not too hard to try to go for HP percentage and energy recharge on most of your artifacts and get something similar to this. Once you've got your energy requirement needs, then you're going to want to go for flat HP. And finally, if you decide to give your Diona a Favonius Warbow, then a subset of crit rate would also be really nice. But keep in mind, if you are not going Favonius Warbow, then you don't need the crit rate. It's only for the weapons effect. So let's take a look at the main stats we want for the other 3 artifact pieces. So for the Sands, we definitely want HP percentage, of course. If, for whatever reason, you are just unable to get a good chunk of energy recharge on your Diona, you can opt in for an energy recharge main stat Sands. For the Goblet, exact same thing. We want HP percentage here. And then for the Circlet, if you want more healing, then you definitely go for the healing bonus Circlet. If you want both good, like better healing and shields, then just stick with a HP percentage Circlet, since healing bonus does not affect shields in any way. Let's go over her constellations. So starting with C1, Diona's going to regenerate 15 energy after the effects of her burst end. So at the end of your burst, when you see the field disappear, Diona will just gain 15 energy whether she's on the field or not. This is really nice in keeping your burst uptime consistent. C2 is called Shaken Not Purred. I just really like the name of that constellation. It's going to increase your Icy Paw damage by 15% and increase your shield damage absorption by 15%. Basically a beefier shield. Additionally, when your paws hit their targets, you're going to create a shield for nearby characters on the field with a 50% of the Icy Paws shield damage absorption for 5 seconds. So essentially a weaker shield is going to go to your friends, if you're playing in co-op. If you are mainly a single player person, then this constellation doesn't really do much for you other than the nicer shield, since we don't care about the damage on Icy Paws. Next up, we have C3 and C5, which are going to increase your burst and skill respectively. This is great, just means more healing and more shields for Diona. C4 is the absolute worst constellation Diona has here because it's completely useless. When you are standing inside the AoE of Diona's burst, her aim shot's charge time is reduced by 60%. As for support build, this does nothing. We're not using Diona for any sort of damage or her aimed shots. C6 is called the Cattail's closing time, and this is arguably her best constellation. Depending on how much HP the active character has, if it's below 50%, signature mix is going to heal you an additional 30%. If your HP is above 50%, you're going to gain 200 elemental mastery. That is huge. That is a big boost in damage, especially when using Diona in a melt team, or again, if you decide to go for hyper fridge or just regular fridge teams. Either or, nice boost in damage there from a C6. So let's talk about team comps with Diona, and here we have one of her more popular teams, although it's a very expensive team. When using Ayaka, it is a very popular option to put Diona with her because, again, the whole cryo battery thing, giving your Ayaka tons and tons of ice particles. If you don't have other characters like Shenhe or Kokomi for your healer, then Diona becomes a viable option here. She also provides a lot of cryo application, so if you're dealing with multiple targets or even just a boss, you can use Diona's skill and burst to apply cryo, which gives Kazuha lots of cryo to work with when you're swirling and using his burst. Here's an example of a hyperfridge team that you could run with Diona. I tried to use as many 4-stars as I could. You still see I have Nahida here though, but if you don't have her, then I can recommend someone like Dendro Traveler or even Kali if you don't have any Dendro characters to work with, or even Kava if you were able to pull for him. I was not. So in a team like this, you're basically still doing the Hyper Bloom setup like you normally would. So you use Nahida to apply Dendro, then you use Barbara to apply Hydro, and you're using Fischl to set off the Dendro cores. But Diona is here to also mix with the Hydro enemies sometimes to apply freeze. This massively helps your team's survivability when going up against groups of enemies, since you don't have to worry about getting hit, since most of your enemies will be frozen. Another variation would be just the regular fridge team, and that's when you swap out your Electro character for an animal character. You can use Sucrose here to group up your enemies, and basically they're going to take lots and lots of damage from the Dendro cores. And last but not least, here's a kind of a weird example for a melt team, but I just tried to keep as many 4-stars as I could. This is what a basic melt team would look like. Again, the reason, if you're noticing why we're bringing 2 healers despite Diona being already a healer, is just to make sure that your team stays at above 50% HP consistently, so that they're getting the 200 EM in this team, so that you're getting that big buff from Diona's burst. But you don't have to set up your melt team exactly like this if you don't want to. It's totally fine. Like if you don't have Rosaria, Kea is a fine replacement. You can also replace Zhonling or even Bennett with a main DPS if you so choose. So if you want to do like Melt Diluc, Melt Yoimiya, Melt Yanfei, things like that, you can definitely set up team comps like that if you want. Alright, so for our combat showcase, we're going to go up against the newest boss in Genshin, or one of the newer bosses, and we're going to showcase how well Diona's shield performs and her healing when used in a... We're just going to use a basic fridge comp for this boss and see how it goes. First, gonna apply that Dendro. See if we can break one of these. You can see the bloom really breaks the shields pretty fast, and you can see Diona's skill also helps with breaking the shield pretty fast. Here we'll use Barbara to break the fire shield. We'll use Diona here. You see Diona basically destroys that shield. It might not be the most damaging comp or the fastest damage out there, but we are consistently breaking this dude's shields. And none of my team, well, thanks to Barbara and Diona, but none of my teammates are taking a lot of damage. And I keep forgetting to do the whole version of Nahida's skill, but that's okay. I would say that was a pretty good showcase, right? Before we bring this guide to a close, I just wanted to say a few words about Diona. I do think she is honestly a really good support character to have in a bunch of teams, whether it's Melt, Fridge, Freeze team, she's gonna do absolutely well in. I don't think she's underrated because it's clear to most people that there are very, very good, strong 4 and 5-star supports in this game that do overshadow Diona. But I also don't think Diona should be slept on or just not built in favor of those other supports. She's still really good. And again, I feel like people forget about the whole 200 EM buff that she provides, which is really, really solid in a lot of reaction-based comps. Even though her shield might not be the strongest, I still think it does its job for the most part. But if we're talking like Spiral Abyss floor 12 with those Consecrated Beasts, that shield is getting eaten up alive in a few seconds just because those monsters do insane amounts of damage. Even with a shield like Zhongli's, they're still breaking that pretty easily. But with all that being said, Diona is still a solid support. Very good in a lot of teams. I think she's still worth building, and she will definitely pull her weight, and then some, from the moment she's built all the ways to the end. With that being said, if you feel like I missed anything about Diona's kit in particular, or you have any additional questions on the character on how to build her, feel free to leave a comment down below. I'll do my best to answer you. Let me know if there's another character you'd like to see in a future guide. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. And I'll see you guys in the next video.